All right, and after tonight's conversations about future anxiety, social instability, constant uncertainty, and people increasingly struggling to believe that life will improve, I think there's one question quietly sitting underneath all of this. What happens psychologically when when a society stops trusting the future? Because honestly, human beings can survive very difficult realities if they still believe that their effort matters. And that belief shaped a lot of the emotional atmosphere of the 80s and 90s. If you really study the emotional atmosphere of the 80s and 90s, you notice something very important, that is movement. Road movies, travel songs, escape songs, starting over songs, dream songs, songs about career, about future. Even when life was difficult, there was still a stronger emotional feeling that something could still be built. And that psychological orientation changes everything. Because when people emotionally believe that their actions accumulate toward a future, then they tolerate struggle differently. But modern life increasingly feels interrupted with these temporary jobs that we were talking about, all the liquid society we're living in, with all turning temporary. Temporary jobs, temporary identities, temporary trends, temporary attention spans, temporary certainty. And many people no longer feel they are building a life, but continuously adapting to instability. And that slowly exhausts the nervous system. I think one of the biggest mental health issues today is not always dramatic breakdown, but this low level, invisible exhaustion, the feeling of constantly processing too much information, too many crises in the news, too many notifications, too many possibilities, too many comparisons, too much uncertainty. And the nervous system was never designed for continuous global awareness. Human beings evolved in local reality, in families, small communities, physical environments, and direct experiences. But now people wake up every morning and immediately emotionally absorb wars, economic fears, social outrage, AI fears, political chaos, and algorithmic emotional stimulation before even fully waking up in the morning. And that changes people psychologically. So, one thing that deeply worries me psychologically is how many people are beginning to lose this long term emotional imagination, the ability to imagine future chapters. Because when people stop imagining future possibilities, they often begin emotionally shrinking their lives. Not necessarily physically, but psychologically. They stop dreaming, stop creating, stop trusting, stop building slowly. And that's dangerous in the long term because hopelessness is not simply sadness. Hopelessness is the collapse of internal future. And this is one reason music still matters so much in these times, especially older music. Because many songs from the 80s and 90s that I try to bring here in the radio still carried aspiration, movement, reflection, emotional sincerity and hope, not fake positivity, but emotional momentum. And sometimes the song reminds people emotionally that life is still moving, that emotions still exist, that beauty still exists, that connection, that human connection still exists. And people psychologically need reminders of that. So maybe one mistake modern culture made was convincing people that meaning only exists in gigantic visible success. But many meaningful lives are built quietly through genuine friendships, small communities, listening to to good music, small projects, family, conversations, creative routines, helping people, even two or three, in your own life, learning slowly, building something slowly, and those things may become more important during unstable times, and not less. And if there's one thing many people emotionally miss from the 80s and 90s, it may not simply be the music itself. It may be the emotional sensation that life will contain this sense of possibility. So I don't think modern people lost the need for that feeling. I think many people are desperately searching for it again. So maybe the future does not need to look exactly like older generations imagined for meaningful lives to still exist. Because human beings have survived many periods of uncertainty throughout history. And what helped people survive psychologically was rarely a perfect sense of certainty. It was usually community, purpose, small routines, creativity, human connection, and the feeling that their actions still mattered. And they still do. So maybe hope today doesn't begin with controlling the entire future, but with rebuilding trust in small meaningful actions again. With one conversation, one small project, one genuine friendship, one routine, one honest moment at a time. Sometimes that's enough to slowly begin rebuilding psychological stability. Alright, everyone, that's been tonight's editorial, and we have got into the end of this live stream. So make sure to subscribe to RetroLovers Radio,